On the 8th of July, 1876, in the little river town of Hamburg, South Carolina, a company of black militiamen, men with every legal right to the muskets in their hands, were surrounded, outgunned, and forced to surrender. Then they were taken out, one by one, and shot. It was the summer of the nation's 100th birthday. A few hundred miles to the north, 10 million visitors were filing past the great Corliss engine at the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia, marveling at a machine that seemed to promise a limitless American future. Two Americas, in a single summer, one of gleaming progress, one of open political murder. And in 5 months, the country would hold a presidential election it could not decide, and in settling it, would quietly decide the fate of 4 million freed people. The election of 1876, the disputed count that made a president, and unmade Reconstruction. To understand how a nation could bargain away its own promises, you first have to see how tired it had become. By 1876, the United States was worn thin. The Panic of 1873 had crashed into a 6-year depression, throwing men out of work and draining the North's appetite for distant Southern troubles. And the party of Lincoln, the party of emancipation, was drowning in scandal. The Crédit Mobilier bribes, the whiskey ring, a Secretary of War impeached for graft. Ulysses S. Grant, the general who had won the war, was closing out a presidency remembered as much for corruption as for principle. The idealism of Reconstruction had curdled into fatigue. And yet, in those same years, something extraordinary had been built. Under federal protection and the new 14th and 15th Amendments, Black Americans had voted and held office in numbers the country would not see again for a century. Hiram Revels and Blanche Bruce sat in the United States Senate. Robert Smalls, born enslaved, represented South Carolina in the Congress. Black men served as sheriffs and legislators and justices of the peace across the South. It was a fragile, revolutionary democracy, and it existed only so long as federal power was willing to stand behind it. That willingness was already failing. Across the South, a campaign its own architects called Redemption was taking the region back for white democratic rule, and not at the ballot box alone, but by the gun. Mississippi had shown the way in 1875, overthrowing its Reconstruction government through a wave of terror its planners openly named the Mississippi Plan. State by state, the old order returned. By the election of 1876, only 3 southern states still stood under Republican governments, propped up by a thin federal presence: South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. Between them, they would decide everything. Into this exhausted country stepped 2 men who each called himself a reformer. The Republicans, desperate for distance from Grant's scandals, passed over their famous names and chose a quiet, dark horse. Rutherford B. Hayes, the governor of Ohio, a Union general with a clean record and cautious convictions. He was, above all, safe, a man no one could accuse of corruption, and a man whose very blandness was his qualification. His opponent was formidable. Samuel J. Tilden, the Democratic governor of New York, had made his name breaking the corrupt Tweed ring, and he ran as the champion of reform against a rotten Republican establishment. Grant, for his part, declined to seek a 3rd term. And so the contest was fought between 2 clean men: the Republicans, waving the bloody shirt of the war and the party's record on black rights, the Democrats promising honest government and an end to what they called bayonet rule in the South. Both men, in careful language, signaled the same thing to white Southerners: that the era of federal intervention was ending. Only one party, though, still put the promise in writing.
The permanent pacification of the southern section of the Union and the complete protection of all its citizens in the free enjoyment of all their rights are duties to which the Republican Party is sacredly pledged. From the Republican Party platform, June the 14th, 1876.
Americans voted on the 7th of November, 1876. By the next morning, the shape of the result seemed plain enough. Tilden had won the popular vote by roughly a 250,000 ballots and stood at 184 electoral votes, a single vote short of the majority he needed. Hayes had 165 and 20 votes from Florida, from Louisiana, from South Carolina, and one contested seat in Oregon hung in doubt. Whoever took all 20 would be president, by the narrowest margin the office had ever known. Most of the country went to sleep believing Tilden had won. But in the small hours, a handful of Republican managers in New York did the electoral arithmetic and saw a path, if, and only if, they could hold all 3 southern states. They wired their men in the South a single urgent instruction: claim the states and hold on. The party chairman, Zachariah Chandler, is remembered for announcing that Hayes was elected, though whether he ever truly spoke the words, no one can prove. What was real was the machinery now turning. In each disputed state, the official count would run through a Republican-controlled returning board, a body with the legal power to throw votes out.
I immediately telegraphed to Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, Nevada, and Oregon that all depended on them, and that with them we were safe, to look out for Democratic frauds. William E. Chandler, a Republican operative, writing to Governor Hayes, November the 9th, 1876.
To understand those Southern returns, you have to understand what had happened before a single vote was counted. In South Carolina, Democratic paramilitaries called the Red Shirts rode openly through black districts to terrify Republican voters away from the polls, following a written blueprint drawn up by a politician named Martin Gary. It left nothing to the imagination.
Every Democrat must feel honor-bound to control the vote of at least one Negro, by intimidation, by purchase, by keeping him from the polls, or as each may determine how best to accomplish it. From Martin Gary's plan of the campaign, South Carolina, in the year 1876.
The plan was carried out in blood. At Hamburg in July, and again at Ellenton that September, white gunmen killed black South Carolinians by the dozen. In Louisiana, the White League had already fought pitched street battles against the biracial state government. This was not violence at the edges of the campaign. It was the campaign. In the Congress, Robert Smalls, the man who had stolen a Confederate steamer to win his own freedom and had come to Washington as a representative, rose to demand that his people be protected.
No troops shall be drawn from the state of South Carolina so long as the militia of that state, peaceably assembled, are assaulted, disarmed, taken prisoners, and then massacred in cold blood. Representative Robert Smalls of South Carolina, on the floor of the House, July 1876.
President Grant had no illusions about what was happening in the South. Closing out his second term, he laid the evidence before the Congress in words that admitted no doubt.
These different kinds and sources of evidence have left no doubt whatever in my mind that intimidation has been used, and actual violence, to an extent requiring the aid of the United States government, in South Carolina, in Florida, and in Louisiana. I am Ulysses S. Grant, President of the United States, the 22nd of January, 1877.
But there was another side to the ledger, and honesty requires facing it. The counting in those states ran through Republican returning boards, and they used their power without restraint. In Louisiana, the board threw out some 13,000 Democratic votes and about 2,000 Republican ones, turning an apparent Tilden lead into a majority for Hayes. Florida's board did much the same. Each state now sent Washington 2 rival sets of electoral votes, one for Hayes, one for Tilden, each insisting it was the true and lawful count.
We shall not vary from our rules. J. Madison Wells, president of the Louisiana Returning Board during its proceedings, November 1876.
So who actually won Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina? The honest answer, then and now, is that we cannot be sure. There was terror and fraud on the Democratic side, suppressing tens of thousands of black votes. And there was partisan manipulation on the Republican side, in boards that answered to the party they served. Both were real. Both may well have changed the outcome. Anyone who tells you 1876 was simply stolen in either direction is telling you less than the truth. Oregon alone stood apart. There Hayes had plainly won the voters, and the quarrel turned only on a technicality, a Republican elector who happened to hold an ineligible federal post. And here the machinery of the Constitution simply ran out. The document said the electoral votes should be counted before the Congress, but it named no one to decide which votes were real when a state sent two. A Republican Senate and a Democratic House were sliding toward deadlock, with no arbiter, an inauguration bearing down, and real fear of violence, even of a second civil war. Their answer was unprecedented. A one-time Electoral Commission of 15 men, 5 senators, 5 representatives, and 5 justices of the Supreme Court, to rule on the disputed returns. The whole design turned on a single man. Of the 5 justices, 4 were evenly split, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and the deciding seat was meant for David Davis, an independent whom neither side could command. It was a genuinely balanced court. And then, at the critical moment, the Illinois legislature elected Davis to the United States Senate. He withdrew from the commission. His seat passed to Justice Joseph P. Bradley, a Republican. The balance was gone. The commission would now sit 8 Republicans to 7 Democrats. Everything came down to one question. Would the commission look behind the certified returns, investigate the fraud, the terror, the discarded ballots, or simply accept the tallies the Republican boards had sent up? To go behind the returns was to risk handing the presidency to Tilden. And so, in case after case, by the very same margin, 8-7, along strict party lines, the commission declined to look. It awarded every disputed vote to Hayes.
They cannot sit as a court of appeals on the action of that board. Justice Joseph P. Bradley, in his opinion on the Florida case before the Electoral Commission, February 1877.
Outraged House Democrats tried to run out the clock with a filibuster. It collapsed. And at roughly 4 o'clock in the morning on the 2nd of March, 1877, with the inauguration 2 days away, the count was finished. Rutherford B. Hayes was declared President of the United States by a single electoral vote, 185 to 184. His enemies would call him his fraudulency for the rest of his life. What had smoothed the way? By tradition, the answer lies in a set of quiet negotiations remembered as the Compromise of 1877, the best known of them held at the Wormley House Hotel in Washington, days before the count ended. There, Hayes's friends let it be known what a Hayes presidency would mean for the South: an end to federal support for the last Republican state governments, a Southerner in the cabinet, and federal money for Southern railroads. Some of it came true. Hayes did name an ex-Confederate, David Key, as Postmaster General. And the troops did leave.
A truce, not a compromise, but a chance for high-toned gentlemen to retire gracefully from their very civil declarations of war. Thomas Nast, in the caption to his cartoon for Harper's Weekly, February 1877.
But how much was really bargained in that room? Historians have argued the point for generations. The classic account by C. Van Woodward described a sweeping sectional deal binding Northern politicians, Southern Democrats, and railroad men. Later scholars pushed back hard. The The promised railroad subsidy never passed, Tilden's own claim had already collapsed, and much of what looked like a bargain, they argued, merely ratified a retreat the political class had already chosen. The most honest reading is the humbling one. There was no single signed deal, because there did not need to be. The nation's will to protect the freed people was already dying. The Compromise of 1877 was less a cause of the retreat than its burial. Hayes took office pledging reconciliation and the supremacy of law. And in the polished cadences of his inaugural address, the abandonment of the freed people was dressed up as a principle.
Only a local government which recognizes and maintains inviolate the rights of all is a true self-government. I am Rutherford B. Hayes, President of the United States, in my inaugural address, the 5th of March, 1877.
The words were gentle. What they meant was not. Within weeks, Hayes ordered the federal troops away from the statehouses in Columbia and New Orleans. Without them, the last Republican governments simply fell. In South Carolina, Governor Daniel Chamberlain gave way to the Redeemer Wade Hampton. In Louisiana, the Republican claimant Stephen Packard, who believed he had won his own election as surely as Hayes had won his, was left with nothing at all. Packard understood exactly what had been done to him and to the men who had voted for him.
One by one, the Republican state governments of the South have been forced to succumb to force, fraud, or policy. Stephen Packard, Louisiana's Republican governor, in the year 1877.
What followed was not sudden, but it was relentless. The Supreme Court had already begun narrowing the federal power to protect black citizens. Now it went further, striking down civil rights laws and, in 1896, blessing segregation itself. Freed from federal oversight, Southern states wrote disfranchisement directly into their constitutions. Poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, until the black electorate that Reconstruction had built all but disappeared. The court had already explained, in cold and careful prose, exactly where black Americans would now have to look for protection.
The duty of protecting all its citizens in the enjoyment of an equality of rights was originally assumed by the states, and it still remains there. Chief Justice Morrison Waite, for the court, in United States versus Cruikshank, 1876.
For the men and women who had staked their lives on the nation's word, the betrayal was almost beyond speech. Frederick Douglass, who had spent a lifetime holding America to its promises, gave the wound its name.
We have been, as a class, grievously wounded in the house of our friends. And in humiliating the colored people of this country, this decision has humbled the nation. I am Frederick Douglass, on the civil rights cases, in Washington, the 22nd of October, 1883.
We have remembered the wrong part of 1876. The cliffhanger is easy to love. The midnight count, the 15 men, the one-vote margin, and the Electoral Count Act that a chastened Congress later passed so that it could never happen again. That is the version in the textbooks, a procedural crisis, safely solved. But the deeper outcome was not procedural at all. As the retreat began, one anonymous letter to Frederick Douglass named the fear that now settled over Black America.
Your race has gone up and will disappear like the Indian before 50 years. The danger is greater now to your race than it was under slavery. An anonymous letter to Frederick Douglass as the federal retreat began. April the 5th, 1877.
That prophecy of despair was not quite right, but it came close enough to haunt. The federal protection withdrawn in 1877 would not return in full for nearly 90 years, until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 finally made the 15th Amendment mean what it had always said. 4 generations of Black Southerners lived and died in the interval, citizens on paper, disfranchised in fact. The election of 1876 is remembered as the one that was almost stolen. Its truer legacy is the promise the nation quietly set down and left lying on the ground for 100 years. This has been Ember and Ash, Forgotten American History. If this story moved you, carry it forward. And we will see you at the next one.